Welcome to Shadow Sleep Stories. If you're here to unwind, relax, or fall asleep, you're in the right place. Before we begin tonight's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it for you. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's drift into the darkness together. Story 1. The Night Shift Security Guard. My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I used to think the worst part of being a night security guard was staying awake. I was wrong. The worst part is what you see when everyone else is asleep. I got the job at Meridian Office Complex because I needed the money and didn't mind working alone. 12 hours, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., walking the halls of a 20-story building filled with accounting firms, law offices, and tech startups. Easy money, they said. Just make your rounds, check the doors, and keep the building secure. The first few weeks were exactly what I expected. Boring. I'd walk the same route every 2 hours. Lobby, basement parking garage, floors 1 through 20, then back to the security desk to update the log. The building was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the occasional creak of settling concrete. But on my 4th week, I started noticing things. It began with the elevators. I'd be walking past them on my rounds, and I'd hear the soft ding of an elevator arriving at a floor. But when I'd check, all 4 elevators would be sitting idle, their doors closed, showing no recent activity on their displays. I mentioned it to Bill, the day security supervisor, but he just shrugged. Old building, he said. Elevators are quirky, probably just the system running diagnostic checks. But it kept happening, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always on different floors, and always when I was nowhere near the elevator bank. The second thing I noticed was the lights. Office buildings are never completely dark. There are always emergency lights, exit signs, the glow from computer monitors left on overnight. But sometimes, walking past certain offices, I'd see light coming from under doors that should have been dark. I had master keys, so I started checking. I'd unlock the door, flip on the lights, and find empty offices with all the computers off. But the rooms would be warm, like someone had just been there. And sometimes I'd catch a faint scent, coffee, perfume, or the smell of someone's lunch heating up in a microwave. By my 6th week, I was starting to dread the 4 a.m. window. That's when the building came alive. I'd hear keyboards clicking from empty offices, phones ringing in conference rooms with no one to answer them, the soft murmur of conversations coming from break rooms that were supposed to be vacant. The worst was the 17th floor. Hartwell Associates, a law firm that had gone out of business 3 months before I started. The space was completely empty. No furniture, no equipment, just bare offices with stained carpets and marks on the walls where pictures used to hang. But every night, around 3 a.m., I'd hear sounds coming from that floor. Footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, the ding of the copy machine that wasn't there anymore. I started avoiding the 17th floor altogether. I'd take the stairs from 16 to 18, skipping it entirely. But one night the main elevator broke down, and I had to use the service elevator to complete my rounds. It only stopped on certain floors, including 17. When the doors opened on 17, I could hear them clearly. Voices, dozens of them, like a busy office in the middle of the workday. I could hear someone on a phone call, discussing a case, a woman laughing at something a colleague had said, the sound of a printer running. I stepped off the elevator, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The voices stopped immediately, as if someone had hit a mute button. The floor was completely silent and completely empty. But it was warm. The entire floor was at least 10 degrees warmer than it should have been, like it was heated by the presence of people who weren't there. I walked through the empty offices, my footsteps echoing in the silence. In what used to be the main conference room, I found something that made my blood run cold. On the bare conference table, someone had left papers. Dozens of them, scattered like they'd been in the middle of an important meeting. But the papers were blank. Not empty, but blank, like someone had erased every word, every number, every piece of information that used to be on them. I grabbed a few of the papers and ran back to the elevator. When I got back to the security desk, I examined them under the desk lamp. The papers weren't just blank, they were warm to the touch. And when I held them up to the light, I could see faint impressions, like someone had written on them with invisible ink. The next night, I brought a pencil and gently shaded over one of the papers, hoping to reveal the impressions. What appeared made me wish I'd never tried. It was a legal document, a contract of some kind, but instead of normal legal language, it was filled with names, hundreds of them, written in what looked like different handwriting. At the bottom, in large bold letters,
Welcome
was a
to
signature.
Shadow Sleep Stories.
Marcus Rodriguez. If you're
My
here
name,
to unwind,
my signature,
relax,
on a
or
document
fall
I'd
asleep,
never seen before,
you're in the right place.
I spent the rest of my
Before
shift
we begin
researching
tonight's
Hartwell
story,
Associates.
don't
What I
forget to
found
like
was
the video,
disturbing.
subscribe to the channel.
The law firm had
and
specialized
tell us in the
employment
comments
law,
where are you watching
particularly
from, and what
wrongful
time is it
death
for you.
cases.
They'd
Now,
represented
get
families of
comfortable,
people who had
close
died in
your eyes,
workplace accidents,
and let's drift into the
industrial
darkness
incidents,
together.
and occupational hazards. But 6 months before they went out of business, something had happened. A class action lawsuit involving a factory explosion. Dozens of workers had died, and their families had hired Hartwell Associates to represent them. The case should have been worth millions. But the firm had suddenly dropped the case. No explanation, no public statement. They'd just withdrawn from the lawsuit, leaving the families without representation. 3 months later, the firm closed its doors. I couldn't find any information about what had happened to the lawyers themselves. James Hartwell, the founding partner, seemed to have vanished. No forwarding address, no new firm, no trace of him anywhere. The next night, I decided to confront whatever was happening on the 17th floor. I armed myself with a video camera, extra batteries, and a voice recorder. If something supernatural was going on, I was going to document it. At 3 a.m., I took the elevator to 17. This time, when the doors opened, the voices didn't stop. They continued their phantom conversations, and I could see them, translucent figures moving through the empty offices, carrying invisible files, sitting at desks that no longer existed. They were the lawyers and staff of Hartwell Associates, trapped in an endless workday, forever processing cases they could never complete. I walked among them, my camera recording everything. They seemed unaware of my presence, lost in their ghostly routine. But as I approached the conference room, one of them looked up. It was James Hartwell himself, a tall man in an expensive suit, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he smiled, a cold, calculating expression that made my skin crawl. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the empty space. "We've been waiting for you. What do you want?" "The same thing we've always wanted. Justice, compensation, payment for services rendered." He gestured to the papers on the conference table. "You've signed the contract. You're part of our firm now." "I didn't sign anything." "Didn't you?" He pointed to my security log, which I carried with me on every round. "Every night you sign in, every night you document your presence in this building. Every signature is a small contract, a little piece of your soul given freely." I looked at my logbook horrified. Every signature I'd made over the past 2 months was there, but now they were all written in the same ghostly ink as the papers on the conference table. "We represent the dead, Mr. Rodriguez, the forgotten, the people who died because of negligence, because of greed, because of corporations that valued profit over human life. But we need the living to help us. We need someone with flesh and blood to carry our cases forward. I'm just a security guard. I don't know anything about law." "You don't need to. You just need to bear witness, to carry our messages to the world of the living, to ensure that justice is served, even if it takes forever." The other ghostly figures turned toward me, their faces desperate and pleading. I realized they weren't just lawyers. Some of them were the victims themselves, the workers who had died in that factory explosion, still seeking justice from beyond the grave. "The factory case," I said. "You dropped it. Why?" Hartwell's expression darkened. "We were threatened, bribed, intimidated into silence. The company responsible for those deaths paid us to disappear, to take their guilt with us to the grave. But death doesn't end obligation, Mr. Rodriguez. It only makes it eternal. What do you want me to do?" "Finish what we started. The evidence is still here. hidden in the files we left behind. The testimony of the dead workers is written in these blank pages, visible only to those who are bound to our contract. Take it to the world. Make them pay. I looked around at the ghostly figures, at the desperate faces of people who had died seeking justice they never received. I thought about their families, still grieving, still fighting corporate lawyers and insurance companies that had unlimited resources and no conscience. If I help you, I said, what happens to me? You become one of us eventually. When your time comes, you'll join our eternal practice. But until then, you'll have purpose. You'll have the satisfaction of knowing that justice delayed is not justice denied. I had a choice to make. I could run, quit my job, and try to forget what I'd seen, or I could help these ghostly lawyers finish their case and ensure that the families of those dead workers finally got the justice they deserved. I thought about my own family, about my father who had died in a construction accident when I was 12. The company had paid my mother a small settlement and made her sign a non-disclosure agreement. We'd never gotten real justice, real accountability. Okay, I said, I'll help you, but I want to know everything. No more secrets, no more mysteries. If I'm going to be your partner, I need to understand exactly what I'm getting into. Hartwell smiled, and for the first time it seemed genuine. Welcome to Hartwell Associates, Mr. Rodriguez. We have a lot of work to do. The blank papers on the conference table suddenly filled with text, witness statements, medical records, safety reports, and corporate emails that proved the factory explosion had been preventable. The company had known about the safety violations for months, but had chosen to ignore them to meet production deadlines. I spent the rest of the night copying everything, photographing documents, and listening to the testimony of the dead workers. By dawn, I had enough evidence to reopen the case and possibly put several corporate executives in prison. I quit my security job that morning and used my savings to rent a small office. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't need to be. I'm something better. I'm a witness for the dead, a voice for the voiceless, a living representative of those who can no longer speak for themselves. The ghostly lawyers of Hartwell Associates guide me, advise me, and help me navigate the legal system. We've won 3 major cases so far, securing millions in compensation for families who thought they'd never see justice. And every night, when the building is empty and the world is asleep, I return to the 17th floor to meet with my ghostly partners and plan our next case. Because some contracts are written in blood, some debts can only be paid with justice, and some partnerships transcend the boundary between life and death. The dead never rest, and neither do I. Story 2, The Inheritance, Gothic Horror. When my great-uncle Ezra died, I inherited more than just his house. My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I should have known that anything bearing the Blackwood name would come with a price. The letter from the estate attorney arrived on a Tuesday morning, completely unexpected. I barely remembered great-uncle Ezra. He was the family hermit, the one who lived alone in the old mansion outside Salem and never came to family gatherings. As far as I knew, he'd been dead for years. But apparently, he'd been very much alive until 3 weeks ago, and for reasons the attorney couldn't explain, he'd left everything to me. The house, the property, and something called the collection. I drove up to Salem on a gray October morning, the kind of day that makes you believe in ghosts and curses. The Blackwood estate sat on 50 acres of woodland, accessible only by a winding dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere but deeper into the past. The house was a Victorian nightmare. 3 stories of dark wood and steep gables, with windows that looked like dead eyes staring out at the world. It should have been condemned decades ago, but somehow it still stood, held together by stubbornness and secrets. The attorney, a nervous man named Pemberton, met me at the front door with a ring of old skeleton keys and a manila envelope sealed with black wax. "The will is quite specific, Mr. Blackwood," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he handed me the keys. "You're to inherit everything, but there are conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "You must live in the house for at least 1 year. You cannot sell it or the contents during that time, and you must maintain the collection." He handed me the sealed envelope. "These are your uncle's specific instructions regarding the collection. He was very particular about following them exactly." What kind of collection are we talking about? Antiques, books? Pemberton's face went pale. I think it's better if you see for yourself, Mr. Blackwood. I'll be honest, I've never actually seen the collection. Your uncle was very private about it, but he paid my firm a substantial retainer to ensure that whoever inherited the house would follow his instructions to the letter. He practically ran back to his car, leaving me alone with the keys and the sealed envelope. The house was a museum of dust and shadows. Every room was filled with antique furniture covered in white sheets, like ghosts waiting to be awakened. The air smelled of old wood, mothballs, and something else. Something sweet and cloying that reminded me of flowers left too long in a vase. I found my uncle's study on the second floor, a room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. On the desk was a leather-bound journal, left open to the final entry, dated just 3 days before his death. The collection grows restless. I can feel them stirring, waiting for someone new to take my place. Thomas will understand, I think. The Blackwood blood runs true, and the calling cannot be ignored forever. I pray he is stronger than I have been. The hunger grows with each passing year. Asterisk. I broke the wax seal on the envelope and read my uncle's instructions. They were written in a spidery handwriting that seemed to crawl across the page. Thomas, welcome to your inheritance. The collection is housed in the cellar, behind the wine racks. The combination to the lock is your birth date. You must feed them every 3 days. No more, no less. Use only what is provided in the ice house. Never look directly at them during feeding time. Never open more than one case at a time. And above all, never let them out. The consequences would be unfortunate. E. Blackwood. Feed them? Feed what? I found the cellar stairs behind a door in the kitchen. The wooden steps creaked ominously as I descended into the darkness, my flashlight beam cutting through air that grew colder with each step. The cellar was larger than I'd expected, with stone walls that wept moisture and a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Along one wall were wine racks, just as my uncle had described, but behind them I could see the outline of another door, secured with a heavy combination lock. I entered my birth date, October 15th, 1995, and the lock clicked open. The room beyond was like something from a medieval dungeon. The walls were lined with what looked like glass coffins, each one about the size of a person. There were 12 of them, arranged in 2 rows, and each one was filled with a strange, luminescent fluid that cast an eerie blue-green glow throughout the room. But it wasn't the cases themselves that made me stumble backward in horror. It was what was floating inside them. Bodies. Human bodies, perfectly preserved, suspended in the glowing liquid like specimens in a laboratory. But these weren't recent corpses. The clothing, the hairstyles, everything about them suggested they were from different eras. One woman wore a Victorian dress, her pale hands folded across her chest. A man in what looked like colonial clothing floated peacefully, his eyes closed as if in sleep. I counted 12 bodies in total, spanning what looked like centuries of fashion and style. And above each case was a small brass nameplate with a date and a single word, Blackwood. These were my ancestors, my family, preserved in some kind of supernatural suspension, neither alive nor dead. I was still staring in shock when I heard a soft tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. It was coming from one of the cases, the one containing a young man in 1920s clothing. As I watched, his eyes opened, milky white but somehow aware. He was looking directly at me. I ran from the cellar, slamming the door behind me, but I couldn't shake the image of those pale, staring eyes. I drove into town and checked into a motel, telling myself I'd call the authorities in the morning and let them deal with whatever sick experiment my uncle had been conducting. But that night I dreamed of them, all 12 of my preserved ancestors, standing around my bed, their wet clothes dripping that strange luminescent fluid onto the motel carpet. They didn't speak, but I could hear their thoughts, whispers in my mind. Feed us, Thomas. We hunger. We have waited so long. I woke up screaming and found my sheets soaked with the same glowing liquid from my dream. I drove back to the house at dawn, knowing I had no choice but to follow my uncle's instructions. In the ice house behind the main building, I found what he'd left for feeding them, Bags of what looked like blood, labeled with dates and stored in industrial freezers. Following the instructions exactly, I returned to the cellar and approached the first case. I found a small opening at the top, sealed with a rubber stopper. With shaking hands, I poured in one bag of blood, watching as it mixed with the luminescent fluid. The body inside, a woman in an 1800s dress, seemed to shudder slightly, and for a moment, her skin regained some color. The nameplate read, Constance Blackwood, 1847. I fed all 12 cases, and with each one, I felt a strange connection for me. These weren't just preserved corpses. They were my family, trapped between life and death, sustained by blood and kept in a state of perpetual existence. Over the following weeks, I learned more about the collection from my uncle's journals. The Blackwood family had been cursed for generations, doomed to exist in this twilight state after death. Each generation, one member of the family was chosen to be the caretaker, to maintain the collection and ensure that the dead remained properly preserved. But the curse came with a price. The caretaker was slowly drained of life force, aging rapidly until they themselves joined the collection. My uncle had served for 40 years, growing old and frail while his preserved ancestors remained unchanged. And now it was my turn. I could feel it starting, a gradual weakening, a slow drain on my vitality. But I also felt something else, power. The preserved Blackwoods weren't just my burden. They were my advisors, my protectors, my connection to centuries of family knowledge and experience. In dreams, they taught me things. Constance showed me how to read the old family records, revealing hidden investments that made me wealthy overnight. Jonathan, the colonial ancestor, taught me about herb lore and healing. Margaret, from the Victorian era, shared her knowledge of spiritualism and communication with the dead. But they also warned me about the hunger. As the months passed, the 3-day feeding schedule became insufficient. They needed more blood, more life force, more of whatever essence kept them suspended between worlds. I started small, a few drops of my own blood mixed with what I bought from medical supply companies. But it wasn't enough. The collection demanded more, and I could feel their growing restlessness. That's when I understood the true horror of my inheritance. The Blackwoods weren't just preserved, they were vampiric, feeding on the life force of their living descendants. Each caretaker was slowly consumed, their essence transferred to the collection until they were drained enough to join it themselves. But I also realized something my uncle hadn't. The curse could be broken. In the deepest part of the cellar, behind the collection room, I found another chamber that my uncle had never mentioned in his journals. This room contained the original source of the curse, an ancient altar carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. According to the inscriptions I could decipher, the first Blackwood ancestor had made a deal with something inhuman, trading his family's mortality for wealth and power. The collection wasn't just a curse, it was a contract, written in blood and sealed with death. But contracts can be broken if you know the right words and have the will to pay the price. On the anniversary of my inheritance, I gathered everything I needed: salt from the Dead Sea, silver blessed by 7 different faiths, and my own blood freely given. I stood before the altar and spoke the words of unbinding I'd found in the oldest family records. The collection cases began to crack, the luminescent fluid draining away as my ancestors finally found peace. One by one, they faded from existence, their faces peaceful as they moved on to whatever comes after death. The last to go was Constance, the woman from 1847. Before she faded, she spoke to me one final time. "Thank you, Thomas. The Blackwood line is free. Live well and die naturally when your time comes." The house collapsed the moment the last case emptied, centuries of supernatural preservation finally giving way to natural decay. I escaped with nothing but the clothes on my back and my uncle's journals, but I was alive and free. I sold the land to a developer who built a shopping center on the site. Sometimes I drive by and watch families going about their normal lives, buying groceries and taking their children to the toy store. They don't know they're walking over the grave of a curse that lasted for centuries. They don't know that sometimes the greatest inheritance you can receive is the chance to break the chains that bind your family to the past. I live a normal life now, but I keep my uncle's journals as a reminder. Because some legacies are meant to be ended, some family traditions are meant to be broken, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to pass on the darkness that came before you. The Blackwood curse died with me, and I've never been more grateful to be the last of my line. Story 3. The Delivery Driver. My name is Jake Morrison, and I drive for a food delivery app called QuickBite. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and lets me work flexible hours while I'm in college. Most nights are routine: pick up food, follow GPS, drop off order, collect tip. But some nights the app sends you places that shouldn't exist. It started 3 months ago, during one of those late night shifts when all the decent restaurants are closed and you're left delivering gas station burritos and convenience store snacks to people who are too drunk or too lazy to get them themselves. I was about to call it a night when my phone buzzed with a new order. Good tip, close to my apartment, easy money. The order was strange, just a single item listed as special delivery from a restaurant called the Night Kitchen. I'd been delivering in this city for 2 years and had never heard of it. The pickup address led me to an alley downtown, between a defunct electronics store and a bail bondsman's office. There was no restaurant, no signs, just a black door with no markings. But my GPS insisted this was the right place. I knocked on the door expecting nothing. Instead, it opened immediately, as if someone had been waiting right behind it. The man who answered was tall and thin, wearing a stained apron of clothes that looked like they belonged in another century. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were the color of old milk. "You're here for the Morrison delivery," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, but I think there's been a mistake. I'm Jake Morrison. I'm the driver, not the customer." He smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous. "No mistake. The order is for you." He handed me a brown paper bag, warm to the touch and emanating a smell that was both appetizing and nauseating, like meat that was perfectly cooked but slightly spoiled. "I didn't order anything," I protested. "The Night Kitchen delivers what people need, not what they order." "You've been chosen for our service, Jake Morrison. Drive safely." He closed the door before I could argue further. I stood in the alley for a full minute, holding the warm bag and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The logical thing would have been to throw the bag away and report the weird encounter to QuickBite support. Instead, I opened the bag. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in white paper, along with a note written in elegant handwriting. "For Jake Morrison, payment for services rendered. Consume within 1 hour for maximum effectiveness." I should have thrown it away. I should have driven home and forgotten the whole thing. But I was starving. I'd been working for 8 hours straight and hadn't eaten since lunch. And despite the strange circumstances, the sandwich smelled incredible. I ate it in my car, parked under a streetlight in the alley. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Perfectly seasoned meat, fresh bread, vegetables that seemed to burst with flavor. With each bite, I felt more energized, more alert, more capable. When I finished, I felt like I could work all night without getting tired. And that's exactly what happened. Order after order kept coming through the app, each one with a better tip than the last. I delivered food until sunrise, covering more ground than I'd ever covered in a single shift, never feeling tired or hungry. When I finally checked my earnings, I'd made more money in one night than I usually made in a week. The next night, I hoped for another visit to the Night Kitchen. I drove past the alley several times, but it was just an alley. No door, no restaurant, no sign that anything unusual had ever happened there. But 3 nights later, my phone buzzed with another special delivery. This time, the pickup address was in the warehouse district, at a loading dock behind a building that had been abandoned for years. The same pale man was waiting for me, holding another brown bag. "Mr. Morrison," he said, like we were old friends. "Your performance has been exemplary. The Night Kitchen is pleased with your service. What is this place? What was in that sandwich?" "Sustenance," he said simply. "Energy for those who work the night shift. Food for the forgotten, the overlooked, the people who keep the city running while everyone else sleeps." He handed me the bag. This time there were 2 sandwiches inside, along with a thermos of something that smelled like coffee, but looked darker than crude oil. "This will last you 3 days," he said. "Use it wisely." I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded answers. But the memory of that incredible energy, that feeling of being unstoppable, was too tempting to resist. I ate the food and worked for 3 straight nights without sleep, food, or rest. I delivered to every corner of the city, places I'd never been, addresses that seemed to exist only in the darkest hours of the night. And the strangest part was the customers. They weren't normal people. They were the city's hidden population. Night shift workers at hospitals and factories, security guards at empty buildings, insomniacs and outcasts, and people who lived in the spaces between normal society. All of them seemed to know about the night kitchen. When I delivered their regular food orders, they'd look at me with knowing eyes and say things like, "You're one of us now," or "The night kitchen takes care of its own." I started to understand that I'd become part of something larger, a network of people who worked while the city slept, sustained by food from a restaurant that didn't officially exist. But the food came with a price. I began to change. My skin grew paler, my eyes more sensitive to light. I found myself sleeping during the day and becoming more active at night. Normal food started to taste bland, then bitter, then completely inedible. I could only stomach the meals from the night kitchen, and I was becoming dependent on them. If I went more than 3 days without a special delivery, I'd become weak, dizzy, unable to function. The regular food from real restaurants wouldn't sustain me anymore. I tried to research the night kitchen online, but found nothing. No reviews, no social media presence, no business registration. It existed only for people like me, the night workers who had been chosen for their service. The breaking point came 6 weeks into this strange relationship. I received a special delivery order, but this time the pickup location was an address I recognized. It was my own apartment building. I drove home, confused and concerned. The same pale man was waiting in the lobby, holding a brown bag that seemed heavier than usual. "Mr. Morrison," he said, "it's time for your final delivery." Final delivery? You've served the night kitchen well, but every delivery driver eventually becomes something more. Tonight, you join our kitchen staff. I looked at the bag in his hands and realized it wasn't food. It was tools, sharp, gleaming instruments that looked like they belonged in a butcher shop. "You're going to help us prepare the meals," he continued. "The special sandwiches, the energy drinks, the sustenance that keeps the night workers functioning. It's an honor, really. You'll be feeding people just like yourself." "What's in the food?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. He smiled, that terrible, sharp-toothed smile. "The same thing that's in all good food, Mr. Morrison. Love, care, and the essence of those who came before you." I ran. I dropped the bag and ran from my own building, got in my car and drove as fast as I could to the other side of the city. But no matter where I went, I could smell the night kitchen, that mix of perfectly cooked meat and subtle decay. They found me at a 24-hour diner, trying desperately to eat normal food and failing. The pale man slid into the booth across from me, patient and understanding. "You can't fight it forever," he said. "The night kitchen has claimed you. You belong to us now, just like all the others who've been chosen for special delivery." "Others? Did you think you were the first delivery driver we've recruited? The night kitchen has been feeding the night workers of this city for decades, and every few months we need fresh ingredients for our special recipes." I understood then. The incredible energy I'd felt, the supernatural stamina, it came from eating other people. People who had been in my position, delivery drivers who had been chosen and consumed and transformed into sustenance for the next generation of night workers. "But don't worry," he continued. "Death isn't the end for night kitchen employees. You'll become part of something larger, something that keeps the city running. Your essence will nourish others who work the forgotten shifts, who serve the hidden population." "I won't do it. You don't have a choice. Look at yourself, Mr. Morrison. When was the last time you saw sunlight? When was the last time you ate normal food? You're already more ghost than human. You belong to the night now." He was right. I could see my reflection in the diner window. Pale, hollow-eyed, barely solid. I was fading away, becoming something that existed only in the spaces between normal life. But I had one advantage he didn't expect. I was still technically alive, still capable of making choices. I grabbed the thermos of coffee from the table, regular, normal, human coffee, and threw it in his face. He screamed as the liquid hit him, his skin sizzling like he'd been splashed with acid. Iron, I realized. Normal human food, it burns you. I ran from the diner and drove straight to the nearest grocery store. I bought iron supplements, garlic, salt, and every folk remedy I could think of. If the night kitchen was supernatural, then maybe supernatural defenses would work. I was right. The iron supplements made me violently ill, but they also made me more solid, more human. The garlic was nauseating, but it seemed to repel the pale figures who had started following me. The salt burned my mouth, but it cleared my head and let me think clearly for the first time in weeks. I spent 3 days detoxing, forcing myself to eat normal food and take iron supplements, burning out whatever the night kitchen had put in my system. It was agony, like withdrawal from a drug I didn't know I was addicted to. But it worked. Slowly, I became human again. My skin regained its color, my appetite for normal food returned, and most importantly, I stopped being visible to the night kitchen's network. I quit delivering food and got a day job. I avoid the night shift, avoid the forgotten corners of the city, avoid anywhere that the night kitchen might operate. But sometimes late at night, I get messages on my old delivery app, special orders from the night kitchen, offering incredible tips for simple deliveries. The pale man's number appears in my contacts calling at 3 a.m. with job opportunities. I never answer. I know that once you've tasted what the night kitchen serves, once you've felt that supernatural energy, it's always waiting for you to come back. There are still delivery drivers out there, working the night shift, getting special orders from restaurants that don't exist. Young people who need the money, who don't ask questions about strange pickup locations or customers who only order during the darkest hours. If you're one of them, if you ever get an order from the night kitchen, do yourself a favor, delete the app, quit the job, and find work that doesn't require you to drive through the city's shadows. Because some jobs feed more than just your bank account. Some jobs feed on you, slowly consuming everything that makes you human until there's nothing left but hunger and the need to serve something that should never exist. The night kitchen is always hiring, but the pay isn't worth what they